Hey, good morning and welcome. We're so excited to have you here for our 2024 economic forecast. My name is Jody Ozarski. I have the privilege of being on the team at the West Coast Chamber. And whether you're joining us here in person or online, we're so happy to have you here with us today. We're glad to welcome back Dr. Paul Isely as our featured speaker this morning to give us an update on what we can expect in the year ahead. Dr. Isely has graciously shared his slides with us in advance, and you should see a QR code up on the screens here in just a moment. Feel free, if you want those slides at your fingertips as he's going through them, to grab those slides now. We're also hoping to save time for questions and answers at the end of his presentation, so if you've got a question, jot those down, store them in your memory bank, and we'll get back to them before the end of the program. Of course, we couldn't do this morning without the support of our gracious sponsors. On the screen behind me, you'll see today's bronze and silver sponsors. I'm sure that's going to switch in just a minute to the bronze and silver sponsors. There they are. Hey, will you join me in thanking these gracious sponsors? We also have some gold sponsors today: Consumers Energy, Disher, First National Bank of Michigan, Metal Flow Corporation, and the True Group. Please thank our gold sponsors. And finally, we have a special program sponsor today, Huntington Bank. John Burmeister is here this morning to share a few words from Huntington. John.
Good morning. Thank you, Jody, for that warm welcome, and thanks to everybody for braving the cold and the snow to make it here, as well as your probably late night celebrating the Michigan win. I'm a state fan, so I wasn't rooting too hard, but good for Michigan, a great game. So it's a true honor to stand before you today representing Huntington Bank on the Lakeshore. Today, we're not just a community gathered, we're partners in progress, deeply committed to the economic strength of West Michigan. At Huntington, we understand the crucial role economic forecasts play in shaping the direction of our region. Whether it's steering strategic decisions, making investments, or planning workforce expansions, the insights derived from economic analysis are paramount. It's with this understanding that we proudly sponsor today's event, bringing in an esteemed expert to share his knowledge. Our guest speaker, Dr. Paul Isely, not only serves as an accomplished economist, but holds the position of Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs at the Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State University. His wealth of experience in economic research, innovation, and regional forecasting uniquely positions him to guide us through the complexities of our local and state economies. At Huntington, we're a people-first bank tightly woven into the fabric of our communities. What sets us apart is our unwavering commitment to the success of local businesses and the well-being of our neighbors. We aren't just colleagues, we're invested neighbors dedicated to seeing each other thrive. In West Michigan, we've cultivated a culture that goes beyond mere transactions. It's about building relationships, understanding unique challenges, and collectively envisioning success. Supporting initiatives like today's event aligns with our broader mission to provide not just financial services, but also knowledge and resources that empower informed decision-making. I extend my sincere thanks to Jody and the West Coast Chamber for providing this invaluable platform. It's through such collaborative efforts that we can collectively navigate the complexities of economic landscapes and drive sustained growth. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and the team at Huntington for your ongoing support of the work that we're doing. And now we're ready for our main event. I'd like to welcome Dr. Isely to the stage today. You're in for a treat today. What you're going to hear today is a message that is curated specifically for this audience. And a lot of the data that you're going to hear is based on the feedback that you have provided through surveys. So this is a hyper-local economic forecast. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Isely.
So it's my job, once again, to try and provide some guidance in a time that's pretty murky. with lots and lots of opinions blowing around as to what's about to happen. So I'm going to add my opinion, but I'm going to give you some reasoning why that's there. So, all right. So I need to start by showing you how we did last year. All right. So it should come up here. All right. So again, this takes my forecast for West Michigan employment across time. I take what I expect is going to happen a year from now, so next January, and I subtract out what actually happened. So if that line is at 0, I was exactly right. If it's between the black and the orange lines, I'm statistically correct, because that's how accurate the US government is at calculating employed people. You'd think with taxes they could get closer than that, but evidently not. All right? And so you can see in January of 2020, we sort of miscalled what COVID would be. I'm in good company there, so it's not so bad. But the rest of the time there, we were on, and our call last year looks like it's going to be right on once the final numbers come in the next month. So this is because we turn forecasting on its head. We spend our time starting by asking all of you what you think is happening and what's happening in your businesses. And then we use that to build our models for West Michigan. So the knowledge that I'm basing everything on is the knowledge that I get from hundreds and hundreds of surveys and focus groups and talks with individual firms. And that's how we build it, as opposed to taking thousands of data points and crunching it through a mainframe computer. All right? So that's how we did last year. All right? So the question this year that everybody asks is there going to be a soft landing? All right? This makes me think back, way back to when I was a much younger man, and I was talking to my great aunt. My great aunt Lois was the head buyer for Sears for kitchens in the late 80s. All right, so she was a relatively powerful woman, and she was asking me about a soft landing. My answer to her is the same answer I have for all of you. Soft landings are possible. Depending on how you who you talk to, they've either never happened or they've happened once in the history of what's going on. So it's possible, but it's highly unlikely, all right? Unfortunately, models are designed to smooth things, and so it makes things look like they're smoother than they're actually going to be, all right? So if we go a step forward here, all right, I got the black slides. So this is really me having to take a second and tell you what we're going to do, all right? So the first thing we need to walk through is how is the consumer behaving this year? Because if you remember last year, we spent time telling you that when the party is over is when the consumer's out of money, all right? And we said that we thought that might happen in the third quarter of last year. We were wrong, but that was aided by the fact that in the third quarter, the government came out and said, oops, we miscounted the amount of money people had by $1 trillion. All right. Well, that sort of changes the answer. So we still need to see them run out of money. All right. We need to see where the government is in their activity. So they have a lot of government spending going on, and we have changes in interest rates occurring. So we have to worry about that. And then finally, we have to loop back and say what's different about Ottawa County and what's different about the 6 townships and cities within them right here around where you're sitting. Because it's different and it's going to behave differently than the US as a whole. So you need to understand that. All right? So, the consumer controls the speed of the landing. Nobody else does. The government doesn't. The Federal Reserve doesn't. You don't. The consumer does. All right? And here's the deal. This is just the change in wealth, or the total wealth for people in the 50th to 90th percentile. Okay? So this is most of the people in this room. All right? The people in the bottom 50%, their income is up about 100% over the start of the, not their income, their wealth is up 100% from the start of the pandemic. So they're doing okay compared to where they were at the beginning. The people above are doing really, really well, so we aren't too worried about them either, all right? But here you can see that big run-up there, that big run-up is the beginning of the pandemic and all of that stimulus money, all right? So remember, we dumped about $5.5 trillion into what ended up being a $2.5 trillion hole. So the recession that would have been caused was about $2.5 trillion. We used about $5.5 trillion to get rid of that, and then wondered, why did everything speed up? Why do people have so much money? And why was there inflation? It's not hard, okay? And then you can see that it starts to waver and starts to come back down. Now, I've adjusted for this for inflation. People have more money, but the money they have is worth less, so we have to do that adjustment. But the big deal here isn't so much wealth, because your wealth is hidden in your 401ks and your house and things like that. And that money's hard to spend. So if you want to spend money, we got to think about what's in your savings account, what's in your checking account, what's in your money market, what's in your share funds at the credit union. We got to look at that type of savings, all right? And when we do that, it looks like this. Now, this red line that you see here, that's where things should be over time, all right? So when you come back to the red line, that's where we are. And you can see we still have elevated savings. So we have people saying, see, there's plenty of room for the consumer to continue to accelerate things. The trick is that money's worth less. So if I adjust it to inflation, it looks like this. All right? So adjusted for inflation, the consumer just last month ran out of money. All right? And they don't know it yet, because when they look in their savings account, they say, see, I have so much money in there. And the psychology hasn't caught up with how much less that money is actually worth yet. So they're continuing to spend money. Okay? So what we see right now is we're now in that danger zone where the consumer is going to have to pull back, because they're not going to be able to access the funds to keep spending at the rate that they're spending right now. And we had a really good holiday season, really good holiday season. People spent a ton of money over Christmas, all right? So here's the bad news. We have a lot of indications that the consumer is going to crank things down relatively quickly, all right? And this is when economic forecasting gets really, really inaccurate, all right? Models are really good at looking at nice, smooth change. I always say it's like driving down the road at 90 miles an hour using only your rearview mirror. When the road is pretty straight, you can do it. When you have a right corner, you never see it, okay? And so as we look, U of M has come out with their nice forecast saying, see, we see this nice smooth drop-off, and that nice smooth drop-off will slow down the economy this year, but won't bring us all the way to a recession. But there's no way their model could ever see a right corner. So the question is there evidence out there that suggests that we might have a right corner? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes, okay? All right, so you just saw that their liquid savings has dropped. We've just shown you that the wealth has started to ease back, okay? This is the transition to 30 days late on bills, all right? The blue is Michigan, the gray is the United States. And what you can see is that we have more and more people transitioning to 30 days late on their loans, okay? This is really early stuff, all right? And it's a quarter late always, because I can't get instantaneous data and show it to all of you, all right? I can see it, but I can't show it. So this is always a quarter late. So what you can see is we aren't quite back to that transitioning that we had prior to entering the pandemic. So we're just starting to get back to normal on 30 days late. And probably as we get here into the first quarter right now, it's reached that point, okay? Now, there's a problem with this number. And the problem with this number has accelerated recently. So we'll talk about that in a second, all right? Now, unfortunately, who you are matters, all right? So we're gonna divide you between young people and old people, all right? And the dividing line is 40 years old. Sorry, old people, all right? Yeah, sort of stings, doesn't it? Well, the good news is if you're old, you're probably doing okay. If you're young, you're not, all right? And here's one indication of this, okay? This is transitioning to 90 days late on your car loan, okay? This is transitioning to 90 days late on your car loan. This is happening with greater and greater regularity. For those of you who don't believe it, go to your kids and ask them to show you TikTok videos of cars being repossessed. It's taking off. I mean, you can't turn on TikTok without seeing a car being repossessed. This is how you do it. You run in really fast, you hook things up, you go 3 blocks away, you secure the car, you know, really cool video. Yesterday I watched one where the woman was in the car, so she sat in there and said, "I'm not leaving." And she was there for like 5 hours trying to convince the tow truck driver to go away, okay? Transitioning to 90 days late. Why is this important? Why do we see this? Look at the orange. Those are 30-year-olds, okay? And look at that end run-up. Go back through time, okay? This goes all the way back to the beginning of 2000. The only year that you see worse is 2009. And this is almost as bad as 2009. Who here remembers 2009? Anybody want to go back? No. All right? Now look at the 40-year-olds. They've come up, but they've just come back to normal. All right? People over 40, we're not seeing the same economic stress that we are for people under 40. That's good news here in Ottawa County. Number one, we have old people here. But number two, old people right now are on the verge of buying cars. And they aren't stressed out the way young people are. So that's going to lead to a good floor for what's going to be able to happen in the automotive market for the next year. And where you're standing right now, if you take the six townships around you, 40% of the jobs are manufacturing. And a good proportion of those manufacturing jobs are actually automotive. So that's good news sitting where you're sitting right now, that there's a floor put on that, and that floor is put in there because half the population is doing pretty okay. All right? So we've heard the consumer continues to spend a bunch of money. Yeah, they do, but let's take this down to going out to eat, buying food, and retail sales. All right, so it doesn't include some fun services like seeing Mickey Mouse. Look at this. The blue line is not adjusted for inflation. And you can see it's above that red line, meaning there's been positive growth. The orange is adjusted for inflation. All of 2023, except for 2 months, saw decreases in consumption compared to the year before. Because the consumer was running out of money. And retail sales are driven by young people, not old people. Old people can do more experiences, and they already have a house filled with too much stuff. All right? Last but not least, I want to talk about why these debt numbers are problematic. And the debt numbers are problematic. This is one day, Cyber Monday. Adobe showed that there were 12.4 billion in sales that day. Okay? That was a 9.6% increase over the year before. Woo! The consumer is alive and well. A third of the increase was inflation. What they were buying was more expensive. Okay? Now, a lot of things went down in price in December. You probably saw some good deals on TVs. I walked through Meijer, and there were some really big discounts on 84-inch TVs. So there's some good stuff there. Clothing went down in price. Several of those types of things dropped as we got into December. But as a whole, things were more expensive. All right? But a third of it was buy now, pay later. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because it doesn't show up in any of our data. When we ask about debt data, none of it includes buy now, pay later. So all those normal things that we look at, the percentage of debt people have compared to income, things like that, doesn't account for the fact that they're now buying stuff online, pressing a button, and saying, I'll pay this much interest and pay it back on this date. That's bad news for February. All right? That's bad news for February because people deferred what they were spending. Okay? So I have consumers. Consumers' wealth has topped out. Their liquid cash and their liquid funds are back to what would be considered normal. And they're showing stress in getting late on loans, borrowing to do common things like buying a TV, all right? All of this says the consumer is spent out. The question is, when do they figure it out? And when they do figure it out, what do they do? Do they dive into their 401k and keep going? We're already seeing 401k withdrawals. Okay? Or do they pull back? We don't know. I wish I could say this is exactly what's going to happen. We don't know. So you have to watch that consumer really hard this year because they're the key to what's about to happen. Okay? So can the government influence a soft landing? So the narrative is the Federal Reserve has been so smart and it's done things so well that we're going to have this nice soft landing. Okay? Well, here's what we have going on. We have the blue, which the 30-year mortgage rate averaged over a month, so don't say that's the mortgage rate right now. Okay? And the orange is the Fed funds rate. That's the rate that the Federal Reserve influences that banks charge each other. Okay? And what you notice is that during normal times, when things hit an equilibrium, there's about 3 percentage point gap between them. Okay? That big red line arrow. So we see this case where there's this gap that starts to happen. Okay? Look where it's at right now. So you can see the mortgage rate has been coming down. And it's coming down because the bond traders have said the Federal Reserve is going to decrease their interest rates. And because the bond traders are saying that, it's pulling down that mortgage rate. Okay? To get that 3 back, what they're betting on right now is that the Fed's going to cut 125 basis points this year. It's possible, but I say bull, all right? I don't think it's going to happen. And part of the problem, again, is this difference between old and young, all right? If you're a young person in your 40s, you've never seen inflation. Ever. You've never seen interest rates much above where they are right now. Ever. And the last time they were this much, for most working professionals in their prime right now, they were in grade school. I was buying a house, but I'm older than that now, all right? And so they may be guessing wrong. They might be guessing wrong. If the Federal Reserve decides to drop interest rates 1.25 percentage points, 125 basis points, something else will be happening in the economy that you don't like. A really, really bad recession, okay? So the bond traders don't know this, but what they're really betting on right now is a pretty deep recession, not a soft landing. Because 125 basis point down would be a pretty radical drop in interest rates, given that the core inflation rate is still running close to 4%. All right? Did that make you feel better? All right. Government spending. Well, we just got a deal in DC. We'll see if it actually makes it through, which basically says we're not going to spend as much money next year. All right? We'll see. But at any rate, it suggests no big increases in government spending. Okay? The state government, however, has plenty of money to spend because the federal government already gave them money and said you need to spend it before 2026. All right? So what we're seeing right now is if you're actually working infrastructure, building culverts and lines and sewers and water systems, you're already booked out through this summer and you're taking orders for the next summer because everybody's got to spend all of that money before 2026. And so what we see is state and local governments, their total spending is offsetting the decreases that we're seeing in the federal. So what does this story say? The story says consumers are going to slow down. The Federal Reserve can't help a lot because we're continuing to see prices. And the government can't come to our rescue by spending more money because they've already agreed to not spend more money. Okay? That all tells us we have a greater probability for a faster slowdown than those standard models are showing. Okay? So we showed you this graph last year. It's a complicated graph, and you all said it was complicated last year, but I love it so much that we're still going to do it. All right? I got to do something complicated so you know I have a PhD, right? So, so the pie chart just tells you the proportion that people spend on stuff. So about 1/3 of your income you spend on shelter, that yellow piece, about 1/4 on goods, about 1/4 on services, and the rest on food and energy. All right? And then there's two numbers next to it. The first number is just the inflation over the last year for that sector. The second number is what would inflation be for a year if it behaved just like last month? Okay? So it's not a forecast, it's just saying how are things changing? And the story here is that if it's stuff you build at factories, which we do a little bit of here, all right? It's going down in price or going up in price slower than everything else. All right? If it's housing or services, it's going up faster than everything else. All right? So that housing right now will keep us anchored. And in this area, that housing number will actually keep it faster than the US economy. All right? We're seeing much more pressure on housing here than we are as the US as a whole, all right? And that's going to keep those rental rates higher. It's going to increase those housing prices faster here than they are in the rest of the US, all right? And as a result, we expect that inflation will continue to slow down this year, but not make it down to that 2% in the end, okay? And it will depend a lot on gasoline. Everybody's like, see, we dropped down to 2%. Did you hear that on the news? The core is still running close to 4% when you take out food and energy. So a lot of this is being driven by the fact that gasoline prices have dropped a lot, okay? And it makes us feel good because when we drive around, you see that. It's nice to pay $2.60 a gallon instead of $3.60. But in reality, it's a pretty small chunk of what I spend money on. And it fools me into thinking things are going down in price faster than they are. All right? All right. So inflation's not going to go back fast enough for the Federal Reserve to really ramp back on those interest rates unless we have a deep recession. Okay? We're still going to see those mortgage rates drift lower because interest rates will be lower in the next 3 years. All right? So we're going to continue to see those mortgage rates drop a little bit, and it's going to put more pressure on the housing market as we get to summer. Okay? So, Ottawa County. Ottawa County is going to do better. It's going to do better than the U.S. as a whole, and it's not as susceptible to that strong downward shift that I've just talked about, okay? So, and there's 3 reasons that we'll walk through for this. The first of that is factories, or manufacturing, okay? So one of the things that we're seeing is continually we've had decreases in new orders for manufacturing. And you can sort of see that there. If you take the orange, which is the smooth 1-year average, as opposed to the more chunky 3-month average. So take the orange one, and you can see starting in 2022, new orders have basically been continually dropping. Until you get to the end there, where it's sort of flat now. Not going up, not going down. And really, we see that continuing here in West Michigan because we see that a lot of the downward movement in furniture has already happened, okay? And a lot of the downward movement in automotive has already happened. And so what we see is for a coming year where that manufacturing sector really is relatively flat. Maybe a little bit up if it's automotive, because old people have money, remember. All right? So, that's good news. And here's just showing you that light vehicle sales, because it's so important for your region. So those last group there is really taking the consensus forecast. I don't predict the number of cars sold, because it's complicated to do, and we have hundreds of people who do it really well in Michigan. So I take theirs and I average them together and I put it here, okay? And you can see that they're really projecting just short of 16 million annualized units. What's good news for us here in West Michigan, since we haven't fully made the transition to electric vehicles yet, is that the gas prices went down, so the share of electric vehicles has gone down, and the share of pickup trucks has gone up, which improves the profitability of the automotive manufacturers, which then helps our 2nd and 3rd tier suppliers that we have here. All right? So for this year, that actually helps us as well. All right? The second reason that we'll be better off here is workers. All right? So, the working age population in Ottawa County has essentially continuously gone up, all right? So this is defined by adding up everybody between the ages of 18 and 65, okay? And what you can see is that group essentially has continuously increased through time. That is unusual, all right? That is unusual. Ottawa and Kent counties really are two places where that's happening. That's good news. The bad news, every morning, 1/3 of you who live here of working age in Ottawa County get in your car and drive to Kent County to work. 55% of you drive someplace else other than Ottawa County. So you have an increasing workforce, but they are increasingly leaving the county to work someplace else. All right? If you take this number back to 2001, it was in the low 40% leaving the county. All right? It's the reason why your MSA used to be Ottawa County by itself, and now it's combined in with Grand Rapids. The MSA is determined by how many people drive between them in order to connect them. And so the BEA and the BLS have decided that Kent and Ottawa counties are heavily linked now. But that's really the other side of the county. If you look at where you're at here, if we take the six townships right around where you're sitting right now, okay? Here, you don't have enough workers. You have 20,000 people driving into those Holland and Zeeland to work every morning. So what's happening right now is your area here is now competing with Kent County for those Ottawa County workers who live between here and there. All right? And over the last 20 years, you've been losing the battle. All right? But it is great potential for you. People love to live and work close to each other. You have a deep workforce that's growing. You can take advantage of it. All right? So that's a good potential. This is just showing you all the counties around you, how they did between 2014 and 2019. So the 5 years before the pandemic. And what you can see is the vast majority of the counties lost working age population. It's really Kent, Ottawa, Barrie, and Allegan that are continuing to increase working age population here in West Michigan. And that's good news for all of you. Okay? So when we asked you what's going to happen to your wages, this is what you all told us. All right? So if you didn't answer it when it came out from your in your email from the chamber, next year, answer it, because it gives us better information about what's happening in your area, okay? And what you can see here is, as a percentage, we have 45% of these firms talking about pay raises between 2 and 3%. And the median and the average is in about the 3.5% range. This is down from 4.5% to 5.5% last year. So it's seeing those wage growth is slowing down, and it's getting much closer to what would be considered a long-term normal. Still a little elevated, all right? Those near the top of that know that they're competing with Kent County for their workers, or they still have more catch-up to do, all right? And as a result of all this population growth, you continue to have housing pressures, all right? You continue to have substantial housing pressures in this area, okay? So what we can see is, even as interest rates went up, the Grand Rapids MSA, remember the Grand Rapids MSA is Ottawa, Kent, it's now Ionia, and Montcalm. Used to be Barrie, okay? You can see interest rates went up and building permits went up. The reason that happened is your working age population continues to increase. Builders see that, and they want to build more. They can't keep up with the amount of housing needed, and so they've shifted to multifamily from single family. So we're seeing a lot more pressure on the multifamily or the townhouse setups or those types of things, mostly because they've run out of places where the zoning will let them build the types of houses that people can afford. Okay? You can see in the rest of the United States, the exact opposite happened. Interest rates went up, people started building less houses. This has to do with that strength that we have here in Ottawa County of the population increasing. Okay? But the problem is, your houses are expensive. All right? Your houses are expensive. And so people are moving up the lake to get away from it. All right? So every year, about 700 people move from Ottawa to Muskegon, net. Some people move up, some people move down, but 700 net are moving up towards Muskegon. And in Muskegon, another 200 move north to Oceana. All right? People are moving up the lake to find the housing prices that they need, because there aren't a lot of jobs in Oceana County. They move to Oceana County and they still commute down then. Okay? And then you can see Ottawa County is also now losing to Newaygo County. So we're seeing net move from Ottawa to Newaygo, net move from Ottawa to Muskegon in order to try and chase those cheaper houses. Okay? How are we doing? We're not doing too bad. So overall, when we talked to you, you gave us confidence, a 68% confidence level, which is indicative of a little uncertainty, but not doing too bad. And you were slightly more worried about next year than you were about where you were standing. So the business leaders in Ottawa County are telling us they're more worried about next year than they were about where they were from, but only a little bit. All right? Employment growth is expected to slow down. Last year we were at close to 1.8%. You're actually looking at now at about 1.3%. So we're seeing that employment growth slow down. And we've seen that already in manufacturing. Okay? Wages, we expect them to go up. And one place where you're behaving differently than the rest of West Michigan is your business leaders have greater concern about the political environment. I did not define the political environment, I just asked the political environment. So this could be more concern about what's happening with the federal elections. It could be more about what's happening locally. But your business leaders are telling us that they're concerned about that. And they're concerned about it at a greater level than what we're seeing across the rest of West Michigan. Okay? So what should you worry about? Watch the consumer. 2, the Federal Reserve actions. We expect that they will start decreasing their interest rates sometime this year, but by nowhere near as much as what's being bet on right now. Okay? And we have other shocks going on. Number 1, we have banking regulation this year that's much higher than what we had last year. Do you remember last year we had a bank go under? And the banking regulators, instead of saying this was an extremely unique bank with extremely unique customers, said this is a systemic risk for everyone. And so they asked everybody to increase their capital requirements. Let me define that for non-bankers. Lend less money, okay? So that's an issue. We have increasing consumer stress. We have to watch that. And we're a little worried about how the government's going to behave during an election year. It's certainly going to cause a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty will cause businesses to invest less money. All right? So let me recap quick. So overall, we see the consumers are stressed, and they're pulling back a little bit, but they could pull back a lot. Watch for that. Okay? We have the government already has pulled all their, has already shot all their ammunition. So they're not here to rescue us if it slows down too fast. The Federal Reserve will be easing, but not as fast as you expect. Ottawa County will outperform because we have young people, we have increasing size of the workforce, we're dependent on areas of manufacturing that sell to the people who do have money, all right? And we continue to have strength in the housing market here. And I didn't even get into ag because I only have so many slides and so much time. But that's a really good strength that you have for this coming year here in West Michigan. All right? So we have these strengths. We will outperform. Don't worry about a recession here much. Do worry if you're selling to the rest of the United States that you have the possibility of one and be watching that consumer. Thank you.
Dr. Isely, thank you for us non-economists in the room to make this a clear understanding of the picture that we can see here in Ottawa County. So thank you for that. We're ready to do some Q&A, and so Hannah and Jess are going to be coming around with microphones so that our guests at home are going to be able to hear the questions as well. So if you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand, and Hannah or Jess will make their way to you. I'd love to kick it off, though, with a question. I had a conversation earlier about the impact of AI on a person's business. How do you see that impacting the economy in the next year or two?
Yeah, so AI is really starting to be this technological change issue. And what we know is that it's going to replace, at least at this point, looks like it will replace some of middle management, all right? We've went through this once before in the early 90s when we had Windows and Word and Excel all come to us at one time in the early 90s. And by the end of the 90s, we had figured out how to use it. And we had this breakneck productivity growth that happened, all right? AI right now has the potential to do that for us, so it will be deflationary. It will increase productivity of the workers that you have if you know how to use it. And right now, many people don't know how to use it. But right now, we see it as deflationary, and we see it as problematic for 50 to 60-year-olds who are in knowledge jobs because they will get replaced. So one of the head economists in the United States this week at the National Economics Conference warned that we see that group of people seeing job losses over the next 2 years as a result of AI adoption. All right, and we've already seen IBM say, we're not going to hire particular job categories because we believe they will be replaced by AI. Okay, so it will be deflationary, and it's going to be problematic for some late career people.
All right, other questions? I've got one up here.
Isely. It's not on. Okay. Jennifer Owens, Lakeshore Advantage. What about entrepreneurship? What do you see the entrepreneurial climate do when it is a recession, and what impact does having a robust entrepreneurial climate have on the economy in general?
Yeah, so entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship has been one of the saving graces of West Michigan. We have a lot of homegrown entrepreneur. Unfortunately, a lot of it's about 40 years old. And created very big businesses that we all work for and deal with. But that entrepreneurial 1970s hasn't really reinitiated here in West Michigan in the same manner. So as we see things slow down, as we see big companies divest workers, and realize that as this slowdown happens, they're not going to divest as many workers as they used to, because even with a slower economy, they don't have enough workers. So they're not going to divest as many, but they will result in the workers who are there having to do more work and think about, oh, maybe I have a better idea. So as we see things slow down, we normally see entrepreneurship go up, all right? And what we've seen is that this younger set wants to move towards entrepreneurism because they want to have a more flexible life. So they're moving away from that corporate culture to a different type of thing that they can define, all right? And take advantage of things that they're seeing that we don't see because we're sitting in the companies that we're already in, all right? So I think that there's some great hope for some entrepreneurship to happen in the near future. Here's our bad thing. A lot of that old entrepreneurship created family-owned wealth. Okay, so we have lots and lots of family-owned businesses across West Michigan and in Ottawa County. And what we're seeing right now is they don't have family members who want to take it on, so they're selling outside the region. So that's pulling that money that could be used to do new entrepreneurial things out of West Michigan. So we're concerned about that. But we do think we'll see a surge in entrepreneurship over the next year as people start to say, I don't like where I'm sitting, but I can come up with something better myself. I don't have to go find another job. Did I answer your question, or I avoided like a good economist? Okay.
Good. Other questions?
I explained it too well.
All right, Chad.
Chad Mesbergen, Tulip Time. Being one of a younger professional in the room, I'm just wondering a little bit more about the age gap with the finances. Is that going to remain the same for me as I get older, or is it going to flip into getting back to that normal line of the above the 40?
Sure. So we have this gap between what we're seeing happening with the older group and what we're seeing happening with the younger group. We also see that there will be a lot of wealth transfer that happens over the next 20 years as baby boomers' wealth transfers to millennials. That happens because of a sad time in people's life, but that transfer will be happening over the next 20 years. Here in West Michigan, the big deal for us is we have a higher density of young people, and that higher density of young people centers around Kent County, centers around Grand Rapids, but bleeds out here into Ottawa County in particular, particular places like Georgetown Township and places like that where they can find the housing that they need, all right? And as they are under greater and greater stress, it's going to change the dynamic of what types of services do we need to provide people, okay? We know what to do for old people. For young people, they're going to be changing how they go out, why they go out, how many kids they have, based on what their income is. And that income right now looks like it's going to be a little bit under stress for the next 2 years. And so that's really going to affect our ability to maintain that increasing workforce that we're seeing. Because remember, the nice thing about a workforce is it has an 18-month lead time. 18-year lead time. You have a baby, it takes 18 years for them to get to the workforce. So we're going to see that type of pressure starting to happen here in West Michigan. The good news is we have the density where they're here together. They have things they can do together, and they have networks that they can do that they don't have elsewhere in the United States. So I think that in the end, it will be strength for us. And I think as we get a year or two out, we're going to start to see their income really accelerate. And it's going to accelerate because they're going to have gone through activity to figure out how to make it accelerate, because they've had to deal with the stress of not having it right now.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions. I see one over here.
Fantastic presentation again. I'm not going to use the one word, but I'll ask you. I processed the message, and I have not been convinced that, let's say, in the last 3 years, the economy has built from the bottom up and the middle out.
All right.
So in other words, is Bidenomics working?
Okay. I don't have the complete question here. So it sounds like you're asking about, you're not convinced that the foundation is good? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, so this is a question about, is our leadership providing the direction the economy needs to go. Okay, so there are lots of ways to answer this. But what we can say is, at least at the federal level, the leadership has not existed. Has not existed because they've chosen to think of leadership as following polls as opposed to figuring out what actually has to happen. And one place where we see this is in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We know the solutions to those. We know the timeline for when they will become a problem. We know the closer we get to that problem, the more expensive it is going to be to fix them. This is all well known. And yet we have political leadership who's unwilling to tackle the problem because they're worried about upsetting people who have white hair like me. Leaders shouldn't worry so much about upsetting people. They should be worried about finding the answers and helping us understand why those answers are there. So I think that's there. I do think that the Federal Reserve has done what it has had to do. And I do think that on the short run, looking at 1 to 2 years out, the federal government has done okay. What it's not doing is looking 5 and 10 years out.
All right, we have time for one last question. Up front here. Oh, sorry, Dan, overruled.
What's your take on affordable childcare? Just the general situation there. Are we coming to a solution? What do you think is the solution locally and overall?
Childcare. Ooh. We still have 4% of the people who aren't working telling us they aren't working because they can't find childcare in Michigan. So we still have a ways to go. We still have a group of people who would work if they could access childcare. So here's the trick. Childcare needs to be affordable, but to convince people to work in childcare, we need to pay them more. And so somehow we have to take those two things that are pushing in different directions and make them work. So I don't have the solution, but I can say that it is an important one to deal with, that finding childcare, affordable childcare, having it close to your work becomes extremely important to actuating that 4% that's not working because they can't get childcare. We do know that flexibility in your workload, so your ability to time shift when you're working, your ability to work some from home, the ability to do those types of things helps alleviate some of those costs. And so we do know that businesses that are willing to do those things are able to keep some of those workers, and for the most part, they're women, in their companies. So it is an important question. Here in West Michigan, we do not have enough daycare for the people who want to work. And I haven't seen a plan yet to solve that. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Dr. Isely, thank you. Thank you for the wisdom that you're sharing with us today, the outlook for what we can expect, and already looking forward to seeing how your predictions come true at this point next year.
Awesome. Thank you.
Will you join me in thanking Dr. Isely? We'd love to have you join us again next month as we return to our regularly scheduled Wake Up West Coast. On February 13, we will be joined by Robert Heath, who will talk about courageous communication in leadership. So with that, I'll say thank you for joining us today and go make it a remarkable day. Thank you, everybody.